Power, Alana King learned early, was never given. It was built in silence, brick by careful brick, while others slept. She discovered this truth not in textbooks or boardrooms, but in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city still dreamed, and she sat alone with spreadsheets that told stories of failure and opportunity. Stephen Cross slept soundly in their bedroom, unaware that his wife had just salvaged another deal he'd nearly destroyed through charm and carelessness. The penthouse overlooked the Hudson, glass walls reflecting the pre-dawn darkness back at her, like a mirror asking questions she refused to answer. Alana's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard with the precision of a surgeon, restructuring payment terms that would save Stephen's largest project from collapse. The developer had threatened to pull out after Stephen missed a critical deadline. Too busy entertaining clients at expensive restaurants to read the contract clauses Alana had highlighted in yellow. "Always the same," she whispered to the empty room, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd had this conversation with herself too many times. Stephen had founded Cross Development with inherited money and abundant confidence, two things that rarely sustained an empire alone. When they married, his company teetered on the edge of irrelevance, sustained by his father's reputation and little else. Alana saw potential where others saw a charming man playing at business. She'd believed in him then, believed that together they could build something extraordinary. That belief had cost her everything she'd worked for at her previous firm, where she'd been on track to make partner before giving it all up, to pour her expertise into his struggling venture. Her colleagues had called her foolish. Her mentor had stopped returning calls. But Alana had seen something in Stephen's eyes that made her think partnership meant something beyond contracts and signatures. She'd been wrong about many things, but never about business. The restructured proposal appeared on her screen, elegant in its simplicity. She'd negotiated with the developer's team throughout the night, offering concessions that cost Stephen nothing but appeared generous, securing extensions that gave him room to breathe. He'd wake up to find the crisis resolved, as he always did, and would smile that easy smile that once made her heart race. Now it just made her tired. Alana saved the document and stood, stretching muscles tight from hours at the desk. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who'd forgotten how to sleep properly, whose eyes carried shadows no concealer could fully hide. She turned down her mother's last invitation to visit, citing work commitments. Her mother's response had been pointed silence, the kind that said more than words. "You're building his castle while your own foundation cracks," her mother had warned once. Over lunch that Alana cut short for a client call, the memory stung more now than it had then. Stephen emerged from the bedroom as sunlight began painting the city gold, his hair tousled in that effortlessly attractive way that had first caught her attention at a Columbia alumni event. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether he deserved his space in the world. "Morning. Beautiful," he said, kissing her forehead absently while reaching for the coffee she'd already prepared. "Did you sleep?" "Enough," Alana lied, the words smooth with practice. He scrolled through his phone, probably checking sports scores or messages from friends planning their next golf outing. The developer crisis that had consumed her night hadn't crossed his mind yet. It wouldn't until his assistant forwarded her carefully worded email explaining the resolution. "I've got that meeting with the Castellano group this afternoon," Stephen said, finally looking up. "You prepped the materials?" "On your desk," Alana confirmed. "But Stephen, you need to actually read the proposal before you present it. They'll ask specific questions about the financing structure." He waved a hand dismissively. "I've got the broad strokes. That's what matters. People invest in confidence, not details." Alana felt something twist in her chest, a sensation she'd learned to ignore. Details are what keep investments from becoming lawsuits. "That's why I have you," he smiled, meaning it as a compliment, unaware how it landed like dismissal. She wanted to argue, to make him understand that his cavalier approach to their work, her work really, was building a house of cards. But she'd learned that Stephen heard criticism as nagging, concern as lack of faith. So she nodded and handed him the presentation folder she'd compiled, complete with talking points written in language he'd understand. "The key points are highlighted," she said. "Don't skip sections this time. You worry too much." Stephen grabbed his suit jacket from the back of a chair. "This is what I'm good at, remember? The people side. You handle the numbers and strategy. I handle the charm." Partnership, she'd learned, was often just a prettier word for division of labor, where only one side's contribution got recognized. After he left, Alana returned to her laptop and opened the encrypted folder where she tracked the real state of cross-development. Stephen saw revenue and growth, but Alana saw the fragile architecture holding it together. Every expansion he celebrated had been built on her negotiations. Every investor relationship he boasted about traced back to her connections from Wharton, her time at her previous firm, her willingness to make midnight calls and sacrifice weekends. She turned his modest construction projects into luxury developments. She'd salvaged contracts he'd signed without reading. She'd transformed his father's legacy company into something that actually mattered in the New York real estate landscape. And Stephen took credit for all of it, standing in front of cameras and investors, telling stories about his vision and determination while Alana stood in the background or didn't attend at all, busy fixing whatever crisis his vision had created. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Lunch this week? I miss my daughter." Alana stared at the message, guilt and resentment mixing into something that tasted bitter. She wanted to say yes, to sit across from her mother and admit that maybe the warnings had been right. But admitting that meant confronting choices she'd made, sacrifices she couldn't undo. She typed back, "Next month maybe. Busy with a major project." The lie felt heavier than usual. Her mother's response came quickly. "You're always busy with his projects, baby girl. When do you work on yours?" Alana didn't answer. Instead, she opened her email and began drafting responses to investor inquiries, managing relationships Stephen didn't know existed, protecting interests he didn't understand. The morning disappeared into work that mattered, even if only she recognized its value. Around noon, her phone rang with Stephen's number. She answered, expecting questions about the Castellano presentation. "Alana, you're brilliant," he said, his voice carrying that infectious enthusiasm that had first attracted her. They loved it. "Talking about a major expansion partnership. This could triple our portfolio." "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it despite everything. She'd worked hard on that proposal, modeling growth scenarios and risk mitigation strategies that made the opportunity irresistible. "We should celebrate," Stephen continued. "Dinner at 11 Madison Park. I'll make reservations." "I can't tonight," Alana said, glancing at her calendar filled with calls and reviews. "I need to finalize the Henderson contract terms and the West Side project needs." "Come on, babe. This is important. We never celebrate anymore. Because celebrations mean nothing when you're always working to create the next thing worth celebrating," she thought, but didn't say. "Tomorrow night," she offered. "I promise." Stephen's sigh carried disappointment he'd forget within the hour. "All right. Hey, actually, Ashley might join us." She texted saying she's in the city for her program orientation. "You don't mind, right?" Ashley Gardner. The name arrived like an unexpected guest, familiar and somehow unsettling. "Of course not," Alana said, because what else could she say? Ashley was her oldest friend, someone who'd shared boarding school secrets and teenage dreams back when the world seemed full of possibility instead of complexity. "Great. She's excited to see you. Says it's been too long." After they hung up, Alana sat with the strange unease that had settled in her chest. She'd been the one to suggest Ashley stay with them when she'd mentioned her graduate program at Columbia, offering their guest room without hesitation. Friendship meant something to Alana, even when she struggled to make time for it. But something about Stephen's casual mention of dinner plans, about Ashley being in the city, felt like the first rumble before an earthquake, barely perceptible, but fundamentally wrong. She shook off the feeling and returned to work, losing herself in contracts and negotiations where the rules were clear and loyalty could be legally enforced. Evening found her still at the desk, the city lights blazing beyond the windows like promises the darkness would eventually consume. Stephen came home late, smelling of whiskey and expensive cigars, his face flushed with success and celebration he'd had without her. "You should have been there," he said, loosening his tie. "Ashley's hilarious. She had everyone at the bar laughing about her London stories." "I'm glad you had fun," Alana said, saving her documents and closing her laptop. Stephen collapsed onto the couch, scrolling through his phone with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd worked hard at being charming. "She's staying at the Marriott for now, but I mentioned our offer about the guest room. She seemed interested." "Of course. She's always welcome. You're the best, you know that?" Stephen smiled at her, genuine warmth in his expression. "I don't tell you that enough." Alana crossed to him, letting him pull her down beside him, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that once felt like safety. Now it just felt like another responsibility she carried, the maintenance of a marriage that existed more on paper than in the quiet spaces between words. "I love you," Stephen said, kissing her temple. "I love you too," Alana replied. The phrase automatic as breathing and just as thoughtless. Later, as Stephen slept beside her, Alana stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly she'd become invisible in her own life. When her contributions had transformed from partnership into expectation. When love had become something she performed rather than felt. Her mother's voice echoed in the darkness. "A woman who builds a man's kingdom rarely gets to rule it." Alana closed her eyes against tears that wouldn't come. Too tired, even for grief. Tomorrow she'd wake early again, fix whatever Stephen broke today, and continue building an empire that would never have her name on it. That was partnership, she told herself. That was love. But deep in some place she didn't examine too closely. A small voice whispered that love shouldn't feel like erasure, and partnership shouldn't mean disappearing. She ignored it, as she ignored most truths that threatened the careful architecture of her life. And eventually sleep claimed her in that restless way it had for months, offering no real rest, only temporary escape from choices she couldn't undo. Outside, the city continued its endless transformation, buildings rising and falling according to plans drawn by people whose names would be forgotten while their creations endured. Anonymous architects of someone else's dreams. Chapter 2. The Guest Who Stayed Ashley. Gardner arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when September rain painted the city in shades of grey and silver, her luggage expensive and her smile effortless in ways that reminded Alana of a different time when neither of them carried the weight of becoming. "Look at you," Ashley said, embracing Alana on the doorstep of the Tribeca brownstone with enthusiasm that felt genuine. "Still stunning, still brilliant, still intimidating everyone in the room." Alana laughed despite herself, helping with the luggage that seemed excessive for someone pursuing a graduate degree rather than relocating permanently. "And you're still flattering your way through life. It's gotten me this far." Ashley's eyes swept over the brownstone's interior with appreciation that bordered on assessment. "This place is incredible. Alana, you've done so well." The phrasing struck oddly, not "you both," but "you," though Alana dismissed it as linguistic carelessness rather than intention. Stephen appeared from his study, his face lighting up with the uncomplicated pleasure of someone greeting an attractive woman who found him interesting. "Ashley, welcome to the chaos." "Chaos?" Ashley laughed, her hand touching Stephen's arm in greeting, a casual gesture that lasted a beat longer than necessary. "This is the opposite of chaos. This is what success looks like." They settled into the living room while Alana prepared tea, listening to Stephen and Ashley's conversation drift from the other room. Easy banter, about Columbia's campus, London's differences from New York, mutual acquaintances from social circles that overlapped in ways Alana had forgotten. Alana was the genius of our class, Ashley was saying when Alana returned with the tea service. Always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Terrifyingly competent. That's my wife, Stephen agreed, accepting his cup. She runs everything. I just show up and smile. He meant it as praise, but something in Ashley's expression shifted, a flicker of calculation quickly masked by her smile. A good partnership, she said. That's rare. Over the following weeks, Ashley's presence wove itself into the fabric of their daily life with a seamlessness that should have felt natural, but instead created subtle distortions. Alana couldn't quite name. Ashley joined them for breakfast, contributing observations about whatever news dominated headlines. She accompanied Stephen to site visits when Alana was occupied with investor calls, taking photographs and asking questions that Stephen found refreshingly engaged. She cooked dinner on evenings when Alana worked late, filling the brownstone with aromas and laughter that greeted Alana like evidence of her own absence. "You don't mind, do you?" Stephen asked one evening, finding Alana at her desk, while Ashley prepared something that smelled divine. "She's just trying to be helpful. Feels bad about imposing." "She's not imposing," Alana said truthfully. "She's welcome here." And she was. Alana wanted to be generous, wanted to honor the friendship they'd shared through formative years. But generosity couldn't quite silence the small observations accumulating like snow before an avalanche. The way Ashley touched Stephen's shoulder when making a point. The inside jokes developing between them about things Alana hadn't witnessed. The evening Alana came home to find them watching a movie together in the darkened living room. Ashley's head tilted towards Stephen's in a posture that suggested intimacy. "There you are," Stephen had said, not moving from his position. "We're watching that documentary about the Maldives. Ashley's been there. It's gorgeous," Ashley added, finally sitting upright. "You two should go. Take a break from all this work." But they never did take breaks, not really. Because Stephen's version of breaks still required Alana to be available for the emergencies his absences created. One evening, Alana returned from a particularly brutal negotiation to find Stephen and Ashley at the dining table. Papers spread between them, covered in Stephen's handwriting and Ashley's comments. "What's this?" Alana asked, setting down her bag. "Ashley's been helping me with that property analysis you asked about," Stephen said. "She's got a good eye for this stuff. Very analytical." Alana felt something cold settle in her stomach. "The Riverside project. I was handling that analysis. I know, but you've been so busy," and Ashley offered. "She's actually really sharp with numbers." Stephen smiled at Ashley with uncomplicated appreciation. "Makes me wonder why she went into design instead of finance." Ashley's expression held carefully constructed modesty. "I just enjoy problem-solving. It's fascinating seeing how these projects come together." Alana picked up the papers, scanning analysis that was competent but missed several critical factors she'd been researching. "This is helpful," she said carefully, "but there are zoning complications and environmental concerns that need deeper investigation." "Always so thorough," Ashley said warmly. "That's why Stephen's so successful. You catch everything." The compliment felt like being patted on the head for doing homework while adults had more interesting conversations. That night, Alana mentioned her concerns to Stephen as they prepared for bed. "I think we should set some boundaries about work," she said, choosing words carefully. "The projects are complex, and involving Ashley without full context could create issues." Stephen frowned, the expression of someone being asked to solve a problem he didn't perceive as existing. "She's just trying to help, Alana. Why are you being territorial?" "I'm not being territorial. I'm being practical. These deals have nuances that—" "You're stressed," Stephen interrupted gently, that maddening patience he used when dismissing her concerns as emotional rather than logical. "Ashley's presence is actually good for us. The house feels more alive. You work too much anyway." Alana swallowed the response building in her throat. The observation that she worked too much because his carelessness required her constant vigilance, that the house felt more alive because Ashley had time to create atmosphere while Alana kept their world from collapsing. "Maybe you're right," she said instead, surrendering to the path of least resistance. Stephen kissed her forehead. "Already moving on?" "Of course I am. Try to relax. Let Ashley help around the house. It's nice having someone to talk to when you're buried in work." The words landed like small cuts, precise and stinging. Alana's mother called the following weekend, her voice carrying across miles with the clarity of someone who'd been rehearsing a difficult conversation. "How's the houseguest situation?" she asked, the question too casual to be casual. "Fine, Mama. Ashley's no trouble." Her mother's skepticism traveled clearly through the phone line. "You remember what I told you about another woman in your home, baby? Especially a woman with time on her hands while you're working yourself to exhaustion for that man. Stephen's not that man. Mama, he's my husband. He's a man who benefits from your intelligence while taking credit for your work. That makes him exactly that man." Her mother's directness cut through pretense like a blade. "And this friend of yours, this Ashley, she sees what you've built. Women like that always do. You're being paranoid. I'm being a woman who's lived long enough to recognize patterns. Just promise me you'll pay attention. Not to what people say, but to what they do when they think you're not watching," Alana promised, then spent the following days trying not to watch, trying not to notice the small ways Ashley had begun occupying space that felt borrowed from Alana's own life. The morning Ashley appeared wearing one of Alana's scarves. "I hope you don't mind." It was chilly, with an ease that suggested this wasn't the first time. The evening Stephen mentioned casually that Ashley had accompanied him to a charity gala because Alana had been feeling ill. How she'd been a perfect companion, really charming with the donors. The night Alana woke to hear laughter from the living room, where Stephen and Ashley sat talking at an hour when Alana usually worked alone, their voices creating an intimacy that excluded her even from her own home. "Am I losing my mind?" Alana asked her reflection one morning, studying her face for signs of the paranoia her mother had warned against and Stephen had dismissed. But her reflection offered no answers, just showed a woman who worked too hard and worried too much, who was probably just tired and stressed and reading into innocent situations. Trust, Alana reminded herself, was the foundation of everything. She'd built her marriage on it, built Stephen's company on it, built her entire life on the belief that loyalty was reciprocal and love meant partnership. So when Stephen suggested that Ashley join them for dinner at an exclusive restaurant, "She's been so helpful lately, and she knows hardly anyone in the city," Alana agreed with a graciousness she had to manufacture. They sat at a corner table while conversation flowed around topics that somehow always circled back to Stephen's projects, his vision, his challenges. Ashley listened with rapt attention, asking questions that made him elaborate on ideas Alana had actually developed. "You're so visionary," Ashley said at one point, her eyes on Stephen with undisguised admiration. "Not everyone can see the potential in spaces the way you do." Stephen glowed under the praise, while Alana picked at her food, watching dynamics she couldn't quite name, but felt instinctively were wrong. "Alana's the real genius," Stephen said magnanimously, including his wife in the conversation like an afterthought. "I just provide the charm. Charm matters," Ashley assured him. "People invest in people, not just projects." It was true, and that truth cut deeper than any lie could have. Walking home through autumn streets, Stephen walked between them, his presence creating physical distance that matched the emotional gulf Alana felt widening. Ashley laughed at something he said, her hand briefly touching his arm, and Alana wondered when exactly she'd become the third wheel in her own marriage. That night, alone in bed while Stephen snored softly beside her, Alana made a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible. She would trust. She would believe in the loyalty she'd invested everything in earning. She would be the bigger person, the understanding wife, the generous friend. She would ignore the small voice whispering that trust without vigilance was just another word for willful blindness, and that sometimes the greatest betrayals came wrapped in familiarity and smiled with friendly faces. Somewhere in the brownstone, Ashley slept in the guest room that had become hers through incremental occupation, and Alana told herself that suspicion was toxic and unworthy, that she was better than her mother's warnings and her own instincts. She would later remember this as the moment she chose loyalty over self-preservation, trust over truth, and she would spend years understanding the cost of that choice. Chapter 3. The Australian Gambit. The opportunity arrived in late autumn with the kind of perfect timing that should have felt like destiny, but instead felt like a door closing on something Alana couldn't quite name. The Thornbury Group's proposal landed in Stephen's inbox, but Alana was the one who recognized its significance, a mixed-use development in Sydney that would establish cross-development as an international player, tripling their portfolio value and opening markets Stephen had only dreamed about accessing. "This is incredible," Stephen said, reading the preliminary terms Alana had already analyzed. "They want to partner with us specifically?" With you specifically," Alana corrected, though the truth was more complex. Thornbury's CEO had met Alana at a conference where she'd been introduced as Stephen's operational director, a title she'd invented to explain her presence at discussions Stephen couldn't navigate alone. The CEO had been impressed enough to research cross-development and found a company that looked far more sophisticated than Stephen's charm alone could have built. "Same thing," Stephen said with that easy confidence Alana envied despite herself. "We're a team." They spent weeks reviewing the proposal. Or rather, Alana spent weeks analyzing market conditions, regulatory frameworks, financing structures, and risk mitigation strategies, while Stephen grew increasingly excited about the prestige of international expansion. "This could change everything for us," he said one evening, his enthusiasm infectious despite Alana's exhaustion. "Put us on a completely different level. It's a significant commitment," Alana cautioned, highlighting sections of the contract that required careful negotiation. "We'd need someone on the ground in Sydney for at least 6 months. Someone who understands our standards and can navigate their regulatory environment." Stephen nodded absently, already imagining himself at ribbon-cutting ceremonies rather than in tedious negotiation sessions with Australian officials. The suggestion, when it came, felt inevitable. "You should go," Stephen said, as though the idea had just occurred to him, rather than being the obvious conclusion Alana had been carefully avoiding. "You're better at this detailed work than I am. I'll hold down the fort here." Alana felt something twist in her chest, a sensation composed of professional pride and personal dread. 6 months is a long time to be away. We'll video call every day. And think about what this means for us, for the company. You've always said we needed to think bigger." Stephen pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head in a gesture that once felt protective. "I trust you completely. No one else could do this." The compliment felt like conscription. Over the following weeks, as Alana prepared for the Australia assignment, she noticed changes she couldn't quite articulate. Stephen and Ashley had developed routines that didn't include her, morning coffee conversations she wasn't part of, inside references to things that happened while Alana was locked in her office managing details Stephen found boring. "You'll take care of him while I'm gone?" Alana asked Ashley one evening, the question emerging before she could consider its implications. Ashley's smile was warm and immediate. "Of course, you don't have to worry about anything. Just focus on conquering Australia." The assurance should have been comforting. Alana's mother was less enthusiastic about the trip. 6 months? Her voice carried disapproval across the phone line. You're leaving your husband alone with that woman for 6 months. Mama, I'm going for work. Important work that could secure our future. Your future or his future. Because from where I'm sitting, you're the only one sacrificing anything. Her mother's sigh was heavy with things unsaid. But you won't listen to me. You never do when it comes to him. The conversation ended in strained silence that Alana told herself was just her mother being overprotective, not prescient. The night before her departure, Stephen threw a small gathering at the brownstone. Friends and associates wishing Alana well, toasting her success, celebrating an opportunity that felt less like advancement and more like exile. Ashley played hostess with practiced grace, refilling drinks and ensuring conversations flowed smoothly, while Alana fielded questions about the Sydney project. At one point, Alana watched from across the room as Ashley touched Stephen's arm. While laughing at something he'd said, her body angled toward him in a posture that spoke of comfort and familiarity. "You've got a good friend there," one of Stephen's colleagues observed, following Alana's gaze. "Taking care of things while you're away?" "Yes," Alana agreed hollowly. "Very helpful." That night, after guests departed and Ashley retired to her room, Stephen held Alana with an intensity that felt like performance rather than passion. "I'm going to miss you," he murmured against her hair. "I'll miss you too." They made love with the desperate quality of people saying goodbye to something more than physical proximity, though Alana couldn't have explained what exactly was being surrendered in that moment. Morning arrived too quickly, pale light filtering through curtains, while Alana dressed in clothes she'd carefully selected for international travel. Stephen drove her to JFK, Ashley accompanying them with cheerful energy that felt intrusive on what should have been a private farewell. At the departure gate, Stephen kissed Alana deeply while Ashley waited nearby with Alana's carry-on bag, a helpful gesture that somehow felt like witness rather than assistance. "Go build us an empire," Stephen said, his smile confident and uncomplicated. "Take care of what we have here," Alana replied, meaning their home, their company, their marriage, all the things she was leaving in his custody. She hugged Ashley briefly, breathing in expensive perfume and feeling arms that held her with surprising strength. "Don't worry about anything," Ashley whispered. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly." The reassurance followed Alana through security, onto the plane across the Pacific Ocean, landing in her consciousness at odd moments with increasing unease. Sydney welcomed her with spring weather and endless complications. The Thornbury Group's offices were elegant, but the project details were messier than preliminary documents had suggested. Zoning disputes, environmental concerns, community opposition that required delicate navigation. Alana threw herself into the work with relief, grateful for challenges that could be solved through competence rather than trust. She rented a modern apartment in Darlinghurst, established routines that didn't include negotiating emotional landmines, and slowly began building the foundation of a deal that would transform cross-development from regional player to international presence. Video calls with Stephen became sporadic, his schedule crazy busy in ways he never specified. He looked well, perhaps better than when she'd left, relaxed and energized in ways that Alana's presence had apparently constrained rather than enabled. "How's everything there?" she'd ask, desperate for details that confirmed her absence mattered. "Great, really smooth. Ashley's been fantastic about helping with the social side of things. Clients love her." Stephen's answers were always enthusiastic and vague, painting pictures of a life continuing perfectly well without Alana's architecture. Ashley stopped responding to Alana's messages entirely, her silence explained away by Stephen as just being super busy with her graduate program. Alana told herself distance was natural, that people grew apart across continents and time zones, that she was being paranoid and possessive. She focused on work instead, negotiating with Australian officials who appreciated her thoroughness, Meeting with local developers who respected her expertise, building relationships that had nothing to do with Stephen's charm and everything to do with her own competence. For the first time in years, Alana felt visible as herself rather than as Stephen's invisible partner. The feeling was both liberating and terrifying. Late one evening, after a particularly successful negotiation session, Alana sat on her apartment balcony watching Sydney's lights sparkle across the harbour. Her phone remained silent. No messages from Stephen, nothing from Ashley, only work communications from people who valued her contributions. She thought about calling her mother, admitting that perhaps the warnings had contained wisdom she'd been too stubborn to accept. But pride and fear kept her silent, because acknowledging doubt meant confronting choices she'd built her entire life around. Instead, she opened her laptop and reviewed the contracts she'd been drafting, losing herself in language that was clear and binding, where betrayal had legal consequences and loyalty could be enforced through clauses and signatures. If only marriages came with the same protections. Weeks blended into months. Australian summer arriving with heat that made Alana's apartment feel like a greenhouse. She established patterns that didn't include Stephen's presence. Morning runs along the harbour, evening work sessions at cafes where no one knew her history, weekends exploring a city that owed her nothing and expected nothing in return. She was happy, she realized with surprise. Not completely, not in ways that erased the ache of separation, but happy in small moments when her own competence was enough and she didn't have to perform gratitude for being allowed to excel. The realization should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the last warning before everything collapsed. A moment of peace before the storm. A breath held before drowning. Alana stood at her apartment window one evening, phone silent in her hand, watching planes trace paths across darkening sky. Somewhere on one of those planes, perhaps, someone was flying toward their own transformation, their own moment of choosing between the life they'd built and the person they'd become. She didn't know yet that her transformation was already underway. That the woman who'd left New York would never truly return. That sometimes the greatest distances weren't measured in miles, but in the space between who you were and who betrayal would force you to become. The Sydney lights blazed against darkness, beautiful and indifferent, promising nothing except that morning would come whether you were ready or not. Alana wasn't ready, but morning came anyway. Chapter 4. Fractures in silence. The delivery truck hit Alana's rental car at an intersection she'd crossed safely 100 times before. The impact, arriving with the suddenness of violence that transforms ordinary moments into dividing lines between before and after. One moment, she was reviewing contract terms on her phone, stopped at a red light while rain hammered Sydney's streets. The next, metal screamed against metal, and pain exploded through her left leg with white-hot intensity that erased thought itself. Everything that followed felt both immediate and distant. Paramedics cutting her free from twisted metal, morphine turning agony into something manageable but not absent. Emergency room lights too bright against consciousness that kept slipping away like water through cupped hands. "Your leg is badly fractured," the surgeon explained with the careful kindness of someone delivering news that would reshape someone's life. "We've inserted pins and plates to stabilize the bones, but recovery will take considerable time, probably close to a year before full mobility returns." A year. The word landed in Alana's drugged consciousness like a stone thrown into water. Ripples spreading outward to touch everything she'd built. She called Stephen from the hospital bed, pain medication, making her thoughts feel wrapped in cotton. "There's been an accident," she said when he answered, his voice carrying the easy warmth of someone whose afternoon had contained no catastrophes. "I'm okay, but my leg is badly broken. The doctors say I need to stay here for recovery." Silence stretched across continents and underwater cables, emptiness that somehow conveyed more than words. "How bad is it?" Stephen finally asked. "Bad enough that I can't fly home for a while. Bad enough that I'll need help managing everything." Alana heard her own voice from a distance, noticing how it carried apology for being injured, for creating inconvenience, for failing to be invincible. "Shit, okay, we'll figure it out." Stephen's response was practical rather than emotional, already shifting into problem-solving mode. "Focus on getting better. I'll handle things here." They spoke for a few more minutes, Stephen's attention clearly divided, before he promised to call again soon and disconnected. Alana stared at her silent phone, the pain medication dulling the edges of emotions she couldn't quite name. She wanted Stephen there, wanted the comfort of his presence, even if their marriage had developed fault lines she'd been trying not to see. But international flights and his crazy schedule made that impossible, or at least impractical enough that he didn't offer. Her mother called an hour later, her voice thick with tears and fury. "I'm flying there immediately," she declared. "Don't argue with me, Mama, it's too expensive and I'm fine. The doctors say—" "I don't care what doctors say. My daughter was in a car accident and is lying in a hospital bed alone. That's not happening." Her mother's tone brooked no argument. "I'll be there tomorrow." But Alana did argue, convincing her mother that the expense was unnecessary, that she was genuinely fine, that coming all the way to Australia for what was ultimately just a broken leg was excessive. The argument exhausted her more than the injury, and eventually her mother surrendered with the heavy silence of someone accepting defeat while knowing they were right. After the call ended, Alana lay in the hospital bed, listening to sounds of people moving through hallways, experiencing their own emergencies and recoveries, and felt more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. The following weeks blurred into a routine of pain, physical therapy, and the slow realization that her body had betrayed her capacity for control. Simple tasks became complex negotiations. Getting to the bathroom required careful planning. Showering was an elaborate production involving waterproof coverings and grab bars, and getting dressed took embarrassingly long. The Thornbury group was gracious about the situation, offering to pause the project until Alana recovered. But Alana refused to be sidelined, setting up her laptop from the hospital bed and later from the apartment where she recuperated, managing negotiations and reviews through video conferences and endless email chains. She couldn't walk properly, but she could still work. That had to be enough. Stephen's calls grew less frequent, his explanations increasingly vague about why he couldn't talk longer or why days passed without contact. "Things are just busy here," he'd say when they did connect. "Ashley's been helping a lot with the day-to-day stuff. She's actually really good at client management." Each mention of Ashley felt like a small cut, insignificant individually, but accumulating into something that couldn't be ignored. "I wish you were here," Alana said one evening. "Pain medication lowering the barriers that usually kept such admissions contained." "I know, baby, but you're doing so well managing everything from there. And honestly, I'm not great with medical stuff. You know that." Stephen's discomfort with illness was legendary, but somehow hearing it articulated while she lay alone and injured made it feel less like quirk and more like abandonment. "I'm not asking you to do medical stuff. I just miss you." "I miss you too. But hey, this project is going to be worth all this sacrifice, right? When you come home, we'll celebrate properly." The promise felt hollow even as he spoke it. Alana's physical therapist was a woman named Rebecca who had no patience for self-pity, but infinite reserves of practical wisdom. "Recovery isn't linear," Rebecca said during a particularly frustrating session where Alana's leg refused to cooperate with even basic movements. "Some days you'll feel strong. Some days you'll feel like giving up. Neither feeling is permanent." "I don't have time for days where I feel like giving up," Alana replied through gritted teeth, forcing her leg through another painful stretch. Rebecca watched her with the assessment of someone who'd seen many patients push themselves toward breaking. You've got time for whatever your body needs. That's not negotiable. The question is whether you'll accept that with grace or fight it until you damage yourself worse. Alana chose fighting because grace felt like surrender, and she'd built a life on refusing to surrender to anything. She worked from her laptop balanced on pillows, leg elevated and throbbing despite medication, conducting video conferences with Australian officials who couldn't see the pain she was in, only her professional competence continuing uninterrupted. Between calls, she managed Stephen's New York operations remotely, reviewing contracts he forwarded without reading, salvaging client relationships he'd strained through inattention, maintaining the invisible architecture that kept cross-development functional despite his increasing distraction. "You're doing too much," her mother said during one of their daily calls. "You need to rest and heal. I can rest when the project is finished." "No, baby. You can rest now and finish the project when you're healthy. There's a difference." Her mother's sigh carried the weight of watching someone you love self-destruct in slow motion. "Has Stephen even asked how you're really doing, beyond the surface questions?" Alana couldn't answer honestly, without admitting truths she wasn't ready to face. Months passed in increments measured by physical therapy milestones and contract negotiations. Alana's leg slowly healed, the pins and plates doing their work, while her body rebuilt itself around the trauma. But other things were fracturing. The connection with Stephen growing thinner across distance, and his increasing absences. The gnawing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong that she couldn't name, but felt constantly. Ashley had stopped responding to any communication entirely. Her silence explained away by Stephen as just being overwhelmed with school. But when Alana logged into social media one sleepless night, she found recent photos of Ashley and Stephen at events together, charity galas, client dinners, casual brunches that looked intimate even captured in pixels. They appeared comfortable together, his arm around her shoulders in several images, her hand on his chest in others, both of them smiling with an ease that suggested this wasn't new. Alana stared at the photos until her eyes burned, her broken leg throbbing in rhythm with heartbeats that felt too loud in the silent apartment. She wanted to call Stephen, demand explanations, ask questions that terrified her with their potential answers. Instead, she closed the laptop and took an extra pain pill, letting medication blur the edges of observations she wasn't ready to confront. Rebecca noticed the change during their next session. "You're withdrawing," she said bluntly. "Not just physically. You're disappearing into your head." "I'm fine," Alana insisted. The lie automatic. "You're alone in a foreign country, recovering from a serious injury, working yourself to exhaustion. And I'd bet good money that whoever you call home isn't giving you what you need." Rebecca's directness cut through pretense. "That's not fine. That's survival mode. Survival mode is still surviving, until it isn't." Rebecca held her gaze with uncomfortable intensity. "What happens when you heal physically but break somewhere else? You think you can work through that too?" Alana didn't answer because the answer was yes. She would work through whatever broke. Because work was the only currency she understood, the only value she could reliably produce, the only thing that made her worth keeping around. The realization tasted bitter. Late one evening, working through contract revisions, while her leg ached with the particular viciousness of healing bones, Alana's video call request to Stephen went unanswered. She tried again an hour later with the same result. His phone went straight to voicemail. At midnight, he finally texted, "Sorry, phone died. Crazy day. Talk tomorrow." The message contained no apology for missed calls, no acknowledgement that his wife thousands of miles away with a broken leg might need more than a casual text. Alana stared at the message, something cold and heavy settling in her chest. She typed several responses, deleting each one before finally writing, "Sure. Sleep well." But she didn't sleep well. She lay awake watching dawn creep across Sydney's skyline, leg throbbing with pain that had become constant companion, and finally admitted what she'd been avoiding for months. Something was terribly wrong. Stephen was pulling away, or had already left emotionally. His life in New York continuing without her in ways that felt less like temporary separation and more like permanent replacement. And Ashley's presence in that life, her silence toward Alana, the photos of them together, it all added up to a conclusion Alana desperately didn't want to reach. As morning light filled her apartment, Alana made a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible. She would finish the Sydney project early, whatever it took. She would return to New York and confront whatever truth was waiting for her there. Because not knowing was worse than any answer could be, even answers that would destroy everything she'd built her life around. Her leg still needed months of recovery, but Alana King had spent her entire marriage working through pain and exhaustion to hold Stephen's world together. She could do it one more time. For answers this time, not for love. Chapter 5. The Return Nobody Expected. The flight from Sydney to New York felt interminable. Hours stacked upon hours, while Alana's healing leg throbbed in protest against the cramped space and recycled air. She'd upgraded to business class to accommodate the extra room her injury required, spending money she'd never have spent before because pain had become currency in ways she was only beginning to understand. The passenger beside her, a businessman absorbed in his laptop, glanced occasionally at the cane secured beside Alana's seat, his curiosity polite enough to remain unspoken. Alana was grateful for the silence, too exhausted for the small talk that flights usually demanded. She'd finished the Sydney negotiations ahead of schedule through sheer force of will and middle-of-the-night video conferences that left her depleted but victorious. The Thornbury Group had signed contracts that would transform Cross Development's portfolio, opening markets Stephen had only fantasized about accessing. She delivered his empire expansion while recovering from an injury that should have sidelined anyone else. Part of her wanted credit for this accomplishment. Another part just wanted to go home. But home had become an abstract concept over the past months, a place she'd built with someone who'd grown increasingly absent, filled with a guest who'd become permanent through Alana's own invitation and absence. The brownstone existed in Alana's mind as it had been before she'd left, but reality was probably something else entirely. Stephen didn't know she was coming. Alana hadn't told him the negotiations had concluded early, hadn't mentioned booking a flight, hadn't sought permission to return to her own life. The decision to surprise him had felt romantic when making it, but now carried an edge of dread she couldn't quite suppress. What if her surprise was unwelcome? What if her absence had become preferred to her presence? Alana pushed the thoughts away and tried to sleep, but turbulence kept jolting her awake, her leg protesting each sudden movement with sharp reminders that healing wasn't complete, that breaking was easier than mending. JFK Airport welcomed her with the familiar chaos of international arrivals, crowds pushing through customs, the smell of industrial cleaning products and anxiety, announcements in multiple languages about security protocols and gate changes. Alana moved through it slowly, her cane marking her as someone to navigate around, receiving sympathetic glances she didn't want. The taxi line stretched forever under grey skies threatening rain. Alana stood with her luggage, scanning for available cars, while other travelers jostled around her with the impatience of people who still moved through the world with easy confidence in their bodies. A yellow cab finally pulled up. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a thick accent, helping load her luggage with gentle efficiency. "Where to?" he asked, sliding back into the driver's seat. Alana gave him the brownstone address, the words feeling strange on her tongue. after months of saying different addresses in different cities. "Welcome home," the driver said cheerfully, pulling into traffic with the aggressive confidence that characterized New York driving. "Thank you," Alana replied, though home felt less like arrival and more like returning to a crime scene where she'd be both detective and victim. The drive through Queens toward Brooklyn should have felt familiar, but everything looked slightly foreign after months away. Buildings she'd passed hundreds of times now seemed to belong to someone else's life, a previous version of Alana who'd existed before pain taught her how fragile certainty could be. Rain began as they crossed into Brooklyn, light at first, then heavier, transforming the city into watercolor versions of itself. The driver navigated with practiced ease, while Alana watched the world blur beyond windows, her heart rate increasing as they neared her neighborhood. "This is nice area," the driver commented, turning onto tree-lined streets that led toward her home.
"You live here long?"
"A few years," Alana said quietly. "Good place to come back to." Alana didn't respond because she wasn't sure anymore if that was true. As they turned onto her street, Alana's attention sharpened with sudden alertness. Cars lined both sides, far more than usual for a weekday afternoon. Through the rain, she could make out shapes in her front garden that looked wrong, unfamiliar. "What number?" the driver asked, slowing. "Right there," Alana said, pointing. "But wait, just slow down for a moment," the driver obliged, coming almost to a stop, while Alana stared at her brownstone with growing incomprehension. The garden was transformed with decorations, balloons in shades of blue and pink, ribbons tied to the fence, flowers arranged in elaborate displays that spoke of celebration rather than everyday life. Cars she didn't recognize crowded the curb. Music drifted faintly through closed windows and rain, and across the gate, a banner stretched in letters too large to miss. "Welcome our little miracle." Alana's mind went blank, unable to process what she was seeing against what she'd expected. Her home looked like a party venue, like Celebration Central, like someplace joy lived instead of the careful architecture of a failing marriage. "Is this right address?" the driver asked, concerned by her silence. "Yes," Alana whispered. "This is it." She paid him with trembling hands, accepting his help with her luggage onto the rain-slick sidewalk. The cab pulled away, leaving Alana standing in the rain, staring at her own home like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. The banner, the balloons, "Welcome our little miracle." Whose little miracle? Whose welcome? Alana's legs, both of them now, not just the injured one, felt unsteady as she approached the gate. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see shapes moving inside. People gathered in what looked like her living room, dressed nicely as though for an important occasion. Her hand shook as she pushed open the gate, its familiar squeak drowned by rain and music. She moved up the path she'd walked thousands of times, each step carrying her closer to whatever truth waited inside. Through the window, she saw Stephen first, her husband, standing in the center of the living room, holding champagne, his face animated with happiness she hadn't seen in months. People surrounded him, faces Alana recognized, his parents, several of his friends, couples from their social circle, and beside him, one hand protectively on a visibly swollen belly, stood Ashley Gardner, pregnant. Obviously, unmistakably pregnant. The world tilted sideways. Alana grabbed the doorframe for support, her cane clattering against brick. Rain soaked through her clothes, but she barely felt it. Her entire consciousness focused on the scene inside her home, like watching a play where she'd somehow missed the entire first act. Ashley was pregnant. Stephen held her with casual intimacy. Their families celebrated together. And the banner, "Welcome our little miracle," suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. Alana's hand found the doorknob, muscle memory operating while her mind struggled to process what her eyes were showing her. The door opened easily because she'd never changed the locks, never imagined she'd need protection from her own life. The music was louder inside, something cheerful and generic. Celebration soundtrack for an occasion Alana hadn't been invited to. Conversations filled the space, laughter punctuating whatever stories were being shared. Alana stepped inside, water dripping from her coat, her cane tapping against hardwood floors with a sound that cut through ambient noise like a knife through silk. The conversations faltered first, voices trailing off as people noticed her presence. Heads turned with the synchronized movement of audience members, reacting to an unexpected entrance. The music continued for several more beats before someone had the presence of mind to turn it off. In the sudden silence, Alana stood in the doorway of her own home, looking at her husband holding another woman, her friend, her guest, the person she'd welcomed with generosity and trust, and felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. Stephen's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The champagne glass in his hand tilted dangerously, but he didn't seem to notice. Ashley's hand remained on her pregnant belly, protective and possessive, her expression frozen between guilt and defiance. Stephen's mother looked away, her shame visible even across the room. His father's face showed something that might have been pity or contempt. Alana couldn't tell which. The moment stretched into eternity, everyone frozen in a tableau of betrayal so complete that movement seemed impossible. Then Alana took another step forward, her cane tapping against floor with deliberate rhythm, and spoke the only words that made it past the constriction in her throat. "Stephen," she said quietly, "what have you done?" Chapter 6. The Public Execution. Stephen's champagne glass finally fell, crystal shattering against hardwood in fragments that scattered like his carefully constructed lies. The sound broke the frozen tableau, everyone suddenly moving in small, anxious ways, shifting weight, averting eyes, whispering to whoever stood closest. "Alana," Stephen managed, her name emerging like a question rather than greeting. "You're home. We thought you weren't coming back for another month." "Clearly." Alana's voice remained steady despite everything inside her threatening to collapse. She moved further into the living room, her injured leg protesting but holding, her cane marking each step with accusatory percussion. "I can see you've been busy." Ashley's hand still rested on her swollen belly, the gesture so inherently maternal it made Alana's stomach turn. Ashley was perhaps 6 months along, maybe more, pregnant before Alana had even left for Australia, or shortly after. Pregnant while sending friendly messages and promising to take care of things. Pregnant while occupying Alana's home, her husband, her life. "We should talk privately," Stephen said, finally finding enough composure to approach her. He stopped several feet away, as though recognizing that touching her would be dangerous. This is complicated." "Complicated," Alana repeated the word like examining it for hidden meanings. "You got my friend pregnant while I was in Australia recovering from an accident, and that's complicated?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered guests. Stephen's mother pressed her fingers to her lips. One of his friends looked at the floor with intense interest. "It's not like that," Stephen said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when trying to manage difficult situations. "You were gone for so long and things happened, Things happened," Alana interrupted, her calm more devastating than screaming could have been. "Is that what we're calling it? Things happened? Like weather or traffic, not choices you made repeatedly over months?" Stephen's jaw tightened, embarrassment shifting toward defensiveness. "You weren't here, Alana. You were on the other side of the world, always working, always too busy to even talk." "What did you expect?" "I expected loyalty. I expected the man I married to not fuck my friend in our bed, while I was managing his business from a hospital bed with a shattered leg." Alana's voice remained level, but everyone in the room flinched at her bluntness. "Don't make me the villain," Stephen snapped, his composure cracking. "You chose to go to Australia. You chose work over our marriage. You were always choosing work. I chose work that built everything you have. I chose to go to Australia to expand your company. I chose to keep working after my accident because your empire would have collapsed without me." Alana moved closer, her cane unnecessary now that adrenaline was flooding her system with chemical courage. And you chose to betray me in the most cliched, pathetic way imaginable. Stephen's face flushed red, anger replacing guilt. You want to talk about choices? You chose to be absent. You chose to care more about deals and contracts than our relationship. You chose to become this cold, mechanical person who couldn't be bothered to prioritize her own marriage. The words landed like physical blows, each one calibrated to wound, to shift blame, to make her responsible for his betrayal. Cold and mechanical, Alana repeated softly. Is that what I became while building your empire? While managing your failures? While making you look competent to investors who would have laughed you out of rooms if they'd known the truth? The truth? Stephen laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. The truth is, you were never enough, Alana. You were never warm enough, never present enough, never anything except work and more work. Ashley actually cares about me as a person, not just as some project to manage. The room had gone absolutely silent now. Everyone watching the marriage dissolve in real time with the horrified fascination of witnesses to a car crash. Ashley spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly strong. I'm sorry, Alana. I never meant for this to happen. But Stephen and I fell in love. Real love, not whatever business arrangement you two had. Alana turned her attention to Ashley, studying the woman she'd welcomed as family. Business arrangement? Is that what you told yourself while sleeping with my husband? That our marriage wasn't real, so your betrayal didn't count? It wasn't like that, Ashley protested, but her words lacked conviction. Then what was it like? Alana asked, genuine curiosity cutting through her rage. Tell me the version where you're not the woman who used my friendship and my absence to steal my life. I didn't steal anything. Ashley's chin lifted with defiance that looked practiced. Stephen chose me. He chose what we have together. You can't steal what someone willingly gives. The logic was sound in its cruelty. Stephen had chosen this, chosen her, chosen to build this new life while Alana's back was literally broken. Alana turned back to Stephen, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the man she'd married, not the partner she'd imagined, but someone weak and selfish who'd always taken the path of least resistance, including into another woman's bed while his wife suffered alone. You're right about one thing, Alana said quietly. I did choose work. I chose to save your failing company. I chose to build an empire from the shambles your incompetence created. I chose to sacrifice my career, my ambitions, my entire life to make you successful. And you're right that it made me cold. But you know what made me cold, Stephen? Realizing too late that I was working myself to death for someone who would never appreciate it, never value it, never even see it. That's not fair, Stephen protested. I always appreciated you. No, you appreciated what I could do for you. There's a difference. Alana looked around the room at the gathered witnesses. All of you saw it. You all watched me work while Stephen took credit. You all benefited from my expertise while treating me like his secretary instead of his partner. Stephen's father had the grace to look ashamed. His mother's tears flowed silently. And you? Alana turned back to Stephen, her voice dropping to something that cut deeper than shouting ever could. You didn't just betray me. You humiliated me. You brought everyone here to celebrate replacing me, to witness my erasure, to confirm that I was disposable and she was worth keeping. We didn't know you were coming back, Stephen said weakly. That makes it worse, not better. You were so confident I wouldn't discover this that you made it a party. Alana felt something hardening inside her, grief calcifying into something dense and unbreakable. You didn't even fear me enough to hide it properly. What do you want me to say? Stephen's voice rose, desperation making him cruel. That I'm sorry, that I regret falling in love with someone who actually makes me happy. Because I'm not sorry, Alana. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Ashley doesn't make me feel inadequate every time I don't understand some contract detail or can't keep up with her constant work obsession. There it was, the truth beneath everything. He resented her competence, hated needing her expertise, felt diminished by her intelligence instead of elevated by it. "So, you chose someone less competent," Alana said. "Someone who made you feel big instead of showing you how small you actually are." "Don't talk about Ashley like that," Stephen warned. "She's carrying my child." "My child," Alana corrected softly. "Because everything you have was built with my work, my expertise, my sacrifice. That child is being welcomed into an empire I created. This house we're standing in, I bought it with money I'd saved before we even met. The company you're so proud of, I restructured it from bankruptcy. The life you're celebrating, I architected every single piece of it." Stephen's face contorted with rage. "You can't take credit for everything. Watch me." Alana straightened despite exhaustion and heartbreak, despite the leg that throbbed and the tears she refused to shed. "Because here's what happens now. I'm going to leave this house, this party, this joke of a marriage. And you're going to enjoy your moment, Stephen. Enjoy her. Enjoy the child. Enjoy pretending you built something worth having." She turned toward the door, her exit clear and clean. "But know this," Alana said, looking back one final time. "One day you will come begging me for mercy. One day you will realize exactly what you lost and exactly what you chose. And when that day comes, when you're desperate and broken and finally understanding the cost of your betrayal, I will decide if you deserve even a moment of my time." The promise hung in the air like prophecy. "You're crazy," Stephen said, but his voice shook. "No, I'm done." Alana opened the door, rain still falling beyond the threshold. "Enjoy your little miracle. I'm going to build my own." She walked out into the storm, pulling the door closed behind her with quiet finality. Rain soaked through her clothes immediately, but she kept walking, her cane tapping rhythm against wet pavement, her spine straight despite everything inside her that wanted to collapse. Behind her, the brownstone blazed with light and celebration, people resuming their party around the ruins of her marriage. Ahead, the city stretched dark and indifferent, offering nothing except possibility and the freedom of having nothing left to lose. Alana hailed a taxi with surprising ease, as though the universe had decided she'd suffered enough for one day. She climbed inside and gave the driver her mother's address in Queens, then let herself sink into the back seat while New York blurred past. Only then, alone with a stranger who wouldn't judge, did Alana King let herself cry, not for what she'd lost, but for the years she'd wasted believing loyalty mattered more than self-respect, and love mattered more than truth. That night, Alana King disappeared from Stephen Cross's life, completely, but she wasn't running away. She was building herself into someone he'd never see coming. Chapter 7. The Ghost Builds an Empire. Alana's mother opened the door to find her daughter soaked and shaking, luggage abandoned on the Queen's doorstep while rain poured down with the kind of relentless determination that matched Alana's tears. "Oh, baby," her mother breathed, pulling Alana inside without questions, wrapping her in arms that smelled like home and safety, and all the things Alana had forgotten existed beyond work and betrayal. They stood in the entryway while Alana sobbed against her mother's shoulder with the ugly, gasping sounds of someone whose grief had been delayed too long. Her mother held her steady, one hand stroking her wet hair, murmuring soft reassurances in the voice Alana remembered from childhood nightmares that had seemed devastating then, but were nothing compared to this. "I should have listened to you," Alana finally managed between sobs. "You warned me and I didn't listen." "Shh, we're not doing that tonight. Tonight, you just need to breathe." Her mother guided her toward the bathroom, started a hot shower, and brought clean towels while Alana stood immobile, as though basic self-care was beyond her current capabilities. The shower water ran until it went cold, Alana standing under the stream, letting it wash away rain and tears, and the feeling of Stephen's words landing like blows. Her leg ached where the pins and plates held bone together. Physical pain easier to process than the emotional carnage. Her mother had prepared the guest room, Alana's childhood bedroom, unchanged except for fresh sheets and a lamp left on against darkness. Alana collapsed into bed wearing borrowed clothes, exhaustion crashing over her with such force that consciousness fled before she could spiral into the thoughts waiting to consume her. She woke late the next morning to find her mother sitting in the chair beside the bed, reading glasses perched on her nose while she worked through a crossword puzzle. "Mama, you didn't have to." "Hush, I'm exactly where I need to be." Her mother set down the puzzle. "How are you feeling?" Alana considered the question honestly. Her body felt heavy, wrung out. Her heart felt like something had been surgically removed and the space left empty. But underneath the grief, something else was stirring, something cold and focused that felt almost like relief. "Angry," Alana said. "Mostly angry." "Good." Her mother's smile was fierce. "Anger is useful. Anger gets things done." Over breakfast, Alana told her mother everything, the months in Australia, the accident, working through recovery while Stephen grew distant, returning to find him celebrating a new family with her closest friend. Her mother listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from sympathy to fury to something harder that Alana recognized as her mother's warrior face. "What are you going to do?" her mother asked when Alana finished. "I don't know yet, but I'm not going back there. I'm not going to fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for. That's my girl. Never beg someone to value you." Her mother poured more coffee. "But baby, you need to protect yourself legally. That man built his empire on your work. Don't let him keep everything just because he broke your heart." The words landed like seeds in fertile ground. Alana spent the next week in her mother's Queen's apartment, barely leaving the guest room, except for meals and physical therapy appointments her mother insisted she keep. The world outside felt dangerous, full of potential encounters with Stephen or Ashley or anyone who'd witnessed her humiliation. But inside the small room where she'd grown up, Alana began planning. She pulled out her laptop and started documenting everything, emails showing her contributions to every major deal, contracts she'd negotiated, client relationships she'd built. The evidence was extensive because Alana had always been thorough, always kept records, never imagining she'd need to prove her own significance. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from Stephen, each one increasingly frantic as he realized she wasn't coming back, wasn't going to make scenes or demands, wasn't going to play the role of scorned wife begging for explanations. Alana blocked his number after reading one message that encapsulated everything wrong with him. "We need to talk about the Sydney contracts." "Who's handling the follow-up?" Not apologies, not remorse. Just concern about business continuity, as though her primary function was operational manager rather than betrayed spouse. The audacity would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly characteristic. "You should get a lawyer," her mother advised one evening over dinner. "A really good, really ruthless lawyer who specializes in making men regret their choices." But Alana hesitated, not from forgiveness, but from strategy. Public divorce proceedings would give Stephen warning, time to restructure assets or hide vulnerabilities. And Alana was realizing she had access to something more valuable than half their marital property. She had the knowledge of exactly how Stephen's company actually functioned, where the weaknesses were, which relationships were genuine versus transactional. She'd built the entire operation. She could dismantle it just as easily. Or better yet, she could build something that made his empire look like a child's toy. The idea crystallized slowly, taking shape over sleepless nights and long afternoons, reviewing contracts she'd drafted. Stephen's success was entirely dependent on relationships Alana had built, expertise she'd provided, infrastructure she'd created. Without her constant intervention, it would crumble. But that passive destruction wasn't enough. Alana wanted more than schadenfreude. She wanted to succeed so completely that Stephen's betrayal became the best thing that ever happened to her. She started making calls to contacts from her previous career. Before Stephen, before she'd poured her ambitions into someone else's dreams. Old colleagues who'd been disappointed when she left. Mentors who'd predicted she was wasting her potential. International investors from the Australia project who'd been impressed by her strategic thinking. "I'm considering some independent ventures," Alana told them, keeping explanations vague. "Would you have time to discuss potential partnerships?" They all said yes. Every single one. Within weeks, Alana had preliminary meetings scheduled with investors in Singapore, London, and Dubai, cities far from New York and Stephen's sphere of influence. Her mother was skeptical about her traveling so soon after the emotional devastation, but Alana insisted. "I need to move forward, Mama. Sitting here thinking about what he did will destroy me. Action is the only thing that makes sense." Her mother studied her daughter's face, seeing something there that was both concerning and impressive. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. Revenge is fine, but not if it costs you your health." "This isn't revenge," Alana corrected. "This is recovery. I'm rebuilding what he took from me. He took your marriage, baby, not your worth. He took years of my life, my career trajectory, my professional reputation. He took my trust and used it to build himself up while keeping me invisible. So yes, I'm taking some things back. The first flight left in 3 days, Singapore first, then Dubai, then London." Alana packed methodically, including documentation and presentations she'd prepared during sleepless nights. Her legs still ached, but physical therapy had restored most of her mobility. She'd learned to function through pain. This was just another kind. Her mother drove her to JFK, the silence comfortable in ways conversation couldn't be. "I'm proud of you," her mother said at the departure curb. "Not just for surviving this, but for refusing to be small because someone else was threatened by your size." Alana hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for not saying I told you so." "I'll save that for later." Her mother's smile was fierce. "Now go show them what Alana King can do when she's not holding herself back for a man who didn't deserve her." Singapore welcomed Alana with humid heat and the kind of sophisticated professionalism she'd been craving. The investors she met were impressed by her Sydney work and intrigued by her vision for independent ventures, mixed-use developments that combined residential, commercial and community spaces in ways that prioritize sustainability over just profit margins. "This is innovative," one investor said, reviewing her preliminary proposals. "Why aren't you doing this through your husband's company?" "I'm exploring opportunities independently," Alana said carefully. "My strategic vision doesn't always align with existing structures." They understood. Or rather, they understood enough to commit initial capital for feasibility studies and site assessments. Dubai was similar, meetings with investors who remembered her from international conferences, who'd been impressed by her analytical approach. They asked fewer questions about her separation from cross-development, accepting her independence as normal rather than aberration. London was different. London was where Ashley's family had connections, where rumours about the situation had spread through social networks that overlapped with business circles. Alana walked into meetings knowing people had heard some version of events, probably Stephen's version, where she was the workaholic wife who'd abandoned her marriage. But Alana had prepared for this. She was direct when asked, neither making excuses nor demonizing Stephen. "My marriage ended," she said simply. "I'm focusing on work that reflects my values and vision. Sometimes personal and professional separations are necessary for growth." Her composure impressed them. Her proposals impressed them more. By the end of her London visit, Alana had secured partnerships that would form the foundation of her own development company, entirely separate from Stephen's world. Sitting in a London hotel room overlooking the Thames, Alana reviewed contracts and commitments that represented her future. She felt lighter than she had in years, despite exhaustion and lingering heartbreak. She'd been so focused on building Stephen's empire that she'd forgotten what it felt like to build her own dreams. Forgotten that she was brilliant on her own, that her value wasn't dependent on his validation, that she could succeed without making herself smaller. For the first time since the accident, since the betrayal, since everything, Alana smiled, not because she was happy. Happiness felt distant still, but because she was remembering how to be powerful. She opened her laptop and began drafting the legal structures for her new company. She would need discrete ownership through carefully layered entities. Nothing that would alert Stephen to her activities until she was ready to emerge. The work absorbed her completely, hours passing while she built frameworks that would support the empire she was planning. Outside, London transformed from afternoon to evening to night, city lights blazing against darkness. Alana worked until exhaustion forced her to stop, her eyes burning and her leg throbbing, its usual reminder of how breaking and healing left permanent marks. Before sleeping, she checked her email one last time and found a message from Stephen's attorney. Divorce papers, finally. Initiated by him presumably so he could marry Ashley before their child was born. Alana read through the proposed settlement with clinical detachment. Stephen's lawyer had been generous in ways that suggested guilt rather than fairness, offering her the brownstone and a reasonable cash settlement. But nothing about the business. Nothing acknowledging her contributions to cross-development success. Nothing recognizing that she'd built everything he was offering to divide. Alana forwarded the documents to her own attorney with a simple message. "We'll respond when I'm ready, not before." Then she closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and let London's darkness embrace her. Tomorrow, she'd continue building. Tomorrow, she'd make more progress toward becoming someone Stephen would never see coming. But tonight, she let herself rest in the knowledge that she was no longer the woman who'd walked into that brownstone to find her life replaced. She was becoming someone else, entirely someone dangerous, someone free. Chapter 8. The Quiet Acquisition Cross. Development's collapse happened slowly at first, then all at once, the way buildings fail when foundations weaken beyond structural integrity. Stephen noticed the first signs during what should have been routine renewal negotiations with their primary investors. The Castellano Group, who'd been reliable partners for years, declined to continue their participation with language that was professionally vague but unmistakably final. "We're reassessing our portfolio priorities," the representative said during a call Stephen had expected to be perfunctory. "Cross-development no longer aligns with our investment thesis." "What changed?" Stephen asked, confusion and panic making his voice higher than usual. "We've had an excellent year. The Sydney expansion alone should have—" "The Sydney expansion was impressive," the representative agreed. "We wish you continued success." The call ended with polite efficiency that felt more insulting than open hostility. Similar conversations followed with other key investors over the subsequent weeks. Each one offered vague explanations about portfolio rebalancing or strategic refocusing. But the pattern was clear even to Stephen. People were withdrawing their support systematically. Ashley tried to help, her enthusiasm exceeding her competence in ways that made situations worse rather than better. She approached clients with cheerful energy that couldn't mask her fundamental lack of understanding about the complex financial structures holding deals together. "Maybe if we offered better terms," she suggested, after another investor declined to renew their commitment. "We can't afford better terms," Stephen snapped, stress making him cruel in ways he'd never been with Alana. "The margins are already tight. We'd need these partnerships, not negotiations about terms." Ashley's face crumpled, her hands protectively on her swollen belly. "I'm just trying to help. You don't have to be mean about it." Stephen immediately apologized, pulling her close. But the moment crystallized something he'd been avoiding. Ashley wasn't Alana. She was warmer, more emotionally available, better at making him feel good about himself. But she couldn't salvage failing deals or negotiate complex contracts or manage the 1,000 invisible details that kept a development company functional, all the things he'd resented about Alana's competence. He now desperately needed. The West Side project, the one Alana had structured with careful payment, schedules and contingency clauses, started experiencing delays because Stephen missed renewal deadlines. Buried in contracts he'd never read thoroughly, penalties accumulated, contractors threatened to walk, and the entire timeline threatened collapse. Stephen called his lawyer in a panic. "Can we contact Alana? She'd know how to fix this." His lawyer's silence was eloquent. "I'm not sure that's advisable given the circumstances," she finally said. And Mr. Cross, the divorce papers she returned, included some concerning language about business entanglements. "You should review them carefully." Stephen hadn't reviewed them at all, assuming Alana would accept the generous settlement he'd offered and disappear gracefully. Now, reading through pages of legal language, he saw references to intellectual property rights and proprietary strategic frameworks and consultant compensation claims that made his stomach turn. "What does this mean?" he asked his lawyer. "It means she's claiming ownership of business methodologies and client relationships she developed. She's arguing that Cross Development's current portfolio value is partially attributable to her unpaid consulting work." "That's insane. She was my wife, not a consultant. Was she paid separately for business contributions?" No, but did she sign any agreements waiving rights to intellectual property she developed?" Stephen's silence answered the question. "Mr. Cross, you should settle this generously and quickly, before she decides to pursue more aggressive claims." But Stephen's pride wouldn't allow capitulation to the woman he'd humiliated. Even as his company continued its slow-motion collapse, his parents visited one evening, finding Stephen alone in the brownstone office surrounded by papers he couldn't interpret and contracts he didn't understand. Ashley had gone to stay with her own family, needing space after another argument about Stephen's stress levels affecting their relationship. "Where's your wife?" his mother asked pointedly, still unwilling to use Ashley's name. "She's not my wife yet, and she's at her parents'. Morning sickness has been rough. I meant your actual wife, the one who built this company you're running into the ground." Stephen's jaw tightened. "Alana left. She made that choice. You humiliated her publicly and expected her to stay." His father's voice carried disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Son, I taught you better than that. You don't understand what our marriage was like. I understand you had a brilliant woman who loved you enough to pour her expertise into your success, and you threw her away for someone younger and more impressed by mediocrity." His mother's directness was brutal. "And now you're losing everything she built because you never learned to value what you had." His father pulled out a folder of documents. "We've been reviewing the company finances. Without Alana's management, you're bleeding money in ways that can't continue. You need to sell or restructure, probably both." "I'm not selling. This is my company. This was Alana's company. You were just the face of it." His mother's words landed like verdict. And now that face isn't enough. After they left, Stephen sat in darkness reviewing the evidence of his own incompetence. Every successful deal had Alana's fingerprints on it. Her negotiation strategies, her risk assessments, her relationship management. The company wasn't failing because investors were being unreasonable. It was failing because the person holding it together had left. Desperation drove him to try calling Alana, but her number went straight to voicemail, the generic message offering no comfort. He tried emailing her, messages that started professional and devolved into pleading. "Alana, I know things ended badly, but we need to talk about the Henderson contract. Please, the Castellano group won't return my calls. Did you speak with them? I'm sorry about everything. I'm sorry for hurting you. But please, the company is in trouble and I don't know how to fix it." None received responses. Ashley returned after a week, her belly even more pronounced. Her patience with Stephen's stress noticeably thinner. "I need you to be present," she said one evening, after Stephen had missed another prenatal appointment. "Our baby is coming in 3 months, and you're obsessed with saving a company that's falling apart anyway." "This company is our future," Stephen protested. "It's how we'll support our family. Maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed your relationship with the only person who knew how to run it." The truth of her words stung precisely because Ashley rarely demonstrated such clear-eyed assessment. Then, salvation appeared in the form of an unexpected email from an international investment consortium Stephen didn't recognize. They were interested in discussing capital injection and operational restructuring for cross-development, with terms that seemed generous enough to stabilize everything. "This could be the answer," Stephen told Ashley. "Hope flooding back for the first time in months. New investors who don't care about past drama, just potential." The meeting was scheduled at a neutral office location in downtown Manhattan. Stephen prepared with the kind of desperate thoroughness he'd never applied before, actually reading contracts and rehearsing explanations of the company's structure. He brought his lawyer, dressed in his best suit, and arrived early to project competence and reliability. The investors arrived precisely on time, 3 representatives from Singapore and London introducing themselves with professional courtesy. They asked preliminary questions Stephen answered with increasing confidence. Then the door opened one more time, and Alana King walked in, transformed in ways that made Stephen's breath catch. She wore a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and power, her hair styled differently, her entire presence radiating authority Stephen had never witnessed during their marriage. She moved without any trace of the injury that had nearly destroyed her, commanding the room's attention simply by entering it. Stephen's rehearsed pitch died in his throat. Alana took her seat at the head of the table with the ease of someone who belonged there, who owned the space through sheer force of competence. She greeted the other investors by name, discussing international market conditions with the familiarity of colleagues rather than strangers. Then she finally looked at Stephen, her expression professionally neutral in ways that were somehow worse than hatred would have been. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice carrying none of the warmth he remembered. "Thank you for joining us. Shall we begin?" Chapter 9. The Boardroom Before the Storm. Stephen's lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently, "Did you know she'd be here?" Stephen couldn't answer because his throat had closed around words that wouldn't form. Alana, his Alana, except she wasn't his anymore, and maybe never had been, sat at the head of the conference table as though she'd always belonged there, as though boardrooms were her natural habitat and he was the intruder, Mr. Cross. Alana's voice cut through his paralysis with professional courtesy that felt more insulting than anger. "We're ready when you are." He found his voice through layers of shock. "I wasn't aware you were part of this consortium. There's quite a bit you weren't aware of." Alana opened a leather portfolio that looked expensive in ways Stephen's accessories never had. "But we're not here to discuss my involvement. We're here to discuss cross-development's financial situation and potential restructuring options." The Singapore investor, an older man whose nameplate read Mr. Tan, nodded agreement. "Ms. King has been instrumental in organizing this potential investment opportunity. Her insights into your company's operations have been invaluable." Stephen felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Her insights?" "Yes, Ms. King consulted on your company's strategic direction during her time in Australia, I believe." Mr. Tan consulted documents in front of him. The Sydney expansion was quite impressive, demonstrated significant expertise in international development negotiations. "That was my project," Stephen said automatically, the claim he'd made so many times it felt like truth. Alana's smile was brief and cutting. "Technically, the Sydney expansion was the Thornbury Group's project. Cross-development was the American partner. But let's not get distracted by attribution questions right now. The London investor, a woman named Ms. Chen, spoke up. Perhaps we should review the current financial situation before discussing anything else. Mr. Cross, can you walk us through Cross Development's current portfolio? Stephen pulled out the presentation materials he'd prepared, grateful for something concrete to focus on beyond Alana's presence. He began describing the company's projects, trying to emphasize successes while downplaying the increasing challenges, but Alana interrupted almost immediately. Excuse me, Mr. Cross, but those revenue projections don't match the most recent quarterly reports. Are you using outdated figures? Stephen glanced at his papers, confusion cutting through his confidence. These are the numbers my accountant provided. Your accountant is using figures from before the West Side project penalties and the Castellano withdrawal. Alana pulled out her own documents, sliding copies across the table. The actual current revenues are approximately 30% lower than what you're presenting. The investors studied the competing figures with expressions that shifted from interested to concerned. How do you have access to those numbers? Stephen demanded, his lawyer putting a restraining hand on his arm. I maintain relationships with several of your contractors and subcontractors, Alana said calmly. Professional courtesy. They share information about project statuses. That's industrial espionage or something. It's networking, something I was quite good at while building your company's foundation. Alana's tone remained professional, but her words landed like scalpels. Shall we continue? Or would you prefer to keep using inaccurate figures to pitch investors? Stephen's lawyer intervened. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to verify these numbers. No need. Alana produced another document. I've prepared a comprehensive financial analysis of Cross Development's current status. It's thorough, accurate, and rather concerning. She distributed copies around the table. Stephen grabbed his, scanning pages that detailed every weakness, every failed deal, every missed deadline, every investor withdrawal. The analysis was devastating in its completeness, showing a company hemorrhaging value despite Stephen's desperate attempts to maintain appearances. This is what happens, Alana said conversationally, as though discussing weather rather than documenting failure, when strategic expertise is removed from operational management. Cross Development's current trajectory suggests bankruptcy within 18 months without significant intervention. That's not true, Stephen protested, though the numbers on the page contradicted him. Which specific figures do you dispute? Alana asked. The revenue decline? The investor withdrawals? The penalty accumulations from missed contract deadlines? I'm happy to provide supporting documentation for every claim. Stephen looked at his lawyer helplessly. His lawyer was studying Alana's analysis with the expression of someone watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse. Mr. Tan spoke gently but firmly. Mr. Cross, this analysis raises serious concerns about the viability of our potential investment. Can you address these findings? Stephen tried. He attempted to explain that the challenges were temporary, that new projects were in development, that the apparent decline was just a rough patch before recovery. But every explanation sounded hollow against Alana's documented evidence. The London investor asked about specific contracts Stephen couldn't explain in detail. The Singapore representative questioned financing structures Stephen had never fully understood. Each question exposed the fundamental truth. Stephen had been the face of Cross Development, while Alana had been its brain. Perhaps, Alana suggested after Stephen fumbled through another inadequate answer, we should discuss the real question. Not whether Cross Development is struggling, clearly it is. But why? The market is challenging, Stephen tried. Real estate development is always volatile. The market is fine. Your competitors are thriving. Alana pulled out another document. The issue isn't market conditions. The issue is operational competence. She projected something onto the screen at the room's end, a comparison chart showing Cross Development's performance against similar companies. The decline was stark, beginning almost precisely when Alana had left for Australia and accelerating after her return. "Interesting correlation," Alana observed. "It's almost as though Cross-Development's success was dependent on expertise that's no longer available." Stephen's face flushed red. "You're sabotaging my company out of spite." "I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm simply no longer propping up a company that couldn't function without my constant intervention." Alana's voice remained level despite his accusation. "You wanted independence from my cold, mechanical management style. Congratulations, this is what independence looks like. You're still bitter about personal issues." "Mr. Cross," Alana interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm not bitter. I'm realistic. And right now, the reality is that Cross-Development needs fundamental restructuring to survive. That's not spite. That's just math." The investors exchanged glances that suggested they'd heard enough. Ms. Chen closed her portfolio with decisive finality. "Ms. King, perhaps you could outline the restructuring proposal you mentioned. I believe we've heard sufficient information about the current situation." Alana nodded, gathering her materials. "Before we discuss restructuring, there are some ownership complications we need to address. Legal matters concerning intellectual property and proprietary methodologies." Stephen's lawyer tensed visibly. "What do you mean?" Mr. Tan asked. "During my time consulting for Cross-Development, which is how I prefer to characterize my contribution rather than as unpaid spousal labor, I developed strategic frameworks, client relationships, and negotiation methodologies that are legally separable from the company itself." Alana spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd had these arguments reviewed by expensive lawyers. "Any restructuring needs to account for the fact that Cross-Development's valuable assets are entangled with intellectual property I can legally claim." "That's insane," Stephen burst out. "You can't just claim ownership of my company. I'm not claiming ownership of your company. I'm claiming ownership of the expertise and relationships that make your company valuable. There's a difference." Alana pulled out another document, this one thick with legal language. "These are the contracts you signed during our marriage. Partnership agreements with clauses protecting intellectual property rights, profit-sharing arrangements you never read carefully, and consulting frameworks that technically made me a shadow stakeholder in everything. Valuable the company developed." Stephen's lawyer was now reading his own copy of these contracts with dawning horror. "You buried this in our marriage paperwork?" Stephen accused. "I included standard protections in our business collaboration agreements. You'd signed them without reading because you trusted me to handle the details." Alana's expression was unreadable. "That trust was clearly misplaced, but the signatures are legally valid." The room had gone very quiet. The investors were watching this unfold with the fascination of people witnessing a carefully orchestrated demolition. "So, what are you proposing?" Ms. Chen asked Alana directly, clearly recognizing who actually held power in this room. Alana looked at Stephen for a long moment, her expression finally showing something beyond professional neutrality. Not hatred exactly, but something colder and more final. "I'm proposing," she said slowly, "that we adjourn for today. Give Mr. Cross time to review the situation with proper legal counsel. When we reconvene, we can discuss terms that acknowledge reality rather than fantasy." She stood, gathering her materials with efficient grace. "Ms. King," Mr. Tan said respectfully, "when would you like to reschedule?" "I'll be in touch with proposed dates." Alana moved toward the door, pausing only when Stephen spoke. "Alana, please. Can we talk privately? Just for a minute?" She turned back, studying him with eyes that held no trace of the woman who'd loved him. "No, Stephen. We have nothing to discuss privately. Anything you need to say can be said through lawyers. Her voice was soft but absolute. You had months to talk to me privately. You chose celebration over conversation. Now you get business negotiations, not personal reconciliation. I'm sorry, Stephen said desperately. I'm sorry for everything. For hurting you, for not seeing what you did, for... Your apologies are several months too late and directed at the wrong concerns. Alana cut him off. I'm not interested in your remorse about personal betrayal. I'm interested in fair compensation for professional contributions. Keep them separate. She walked out, the investors following after offering Stephen perfunctory goodbyes. The door closed with quiet finality, leaving Stephen and his lawyer alone in the conference room, surrounded by evidence of systematic failure. How bad is this? Stephen asked, though he already knew. His lawyer set down the contracts with the care of someone handling explosives. Very bad. She's built an airtight case for claiming significant ownership of your company's valuable assets, and she clearly has the investor relationships to make alternative options impossible. So what do I do? You settle generously and quickly before she decides to pursue even more aggressive claims. Stephen looked at the closed door through which his wife, ex-wife, had just exited, taking with her any illusion that he'd built his empire through his own efforts. For the first time since childhood, Stephen Cross understood what it felt like to be completely powerless, and the worst part was knowing he deserved it. Chapter 10. The Empire Decides. The reconvened meeting happened 1 week later in the same conference room. Stephen arrived with 3 lawyers this time, including a notorious corporate litigator hired with money he didn't have, hoping to intimidate Alana into backing down. Alana arrived with a single young attorney, carrying only a slim briefcase. Stephen felt a flicker of hope. That hope died when the investors filed in, followed by additional legal representatives, and finally a video screen illuminating with 4 faces, Stephen's parents and Ashley's parents, witnessing everything in real time. What is this? Stephen demanded. Accountability, Alana said calmly, taking her seat. You humiliated me publicly with families watching. I thought it only fair that families witness this conclusion as well. Stephen's mother's face on the screen showed grim satisfaction. His father looked resigned. Alana withdrew a single document from her briefcase. I'm going to make this simple. Cross-development is insolvent. Debts exceed assets significantly. The only components with real value, client relationships, development methodologies, reputation, are all legally traceable to my contributions during our marriage and consulting work. Stephen's lead attorney jumped in. Ms. King, we dispute that characterization. Your analysis, Alana interrupted smoothly, assumes cross-development owns its client relationships outright. It doesn't. She projected emails, contracts, and documents onto the screen. Stephen's stomach sank as he realized how much evidence existed of his dependency on her. This email chain shows me negotiating the Castellano Group's investment. My personal relationships made that partnership possible. The contract explicitly names me as relationship manager, with clauses allowing me to take that relationship elsewhere. She pulled up another document. The Henderson contract. I structured every component from initial pitch through final signing. I can demonstrate through drafts that every valuable element came from my analysis, not Mr. Cross's input. Stephen's lawyer scrambled, clearly unprepared for this level of documentation. She was your wife, one protested. Marital contributions aren't separately claimable. Marital contributions made without compensation, while the other spouse benefits professionally, are absolutely claimable, Alana's attorney responded. Especially when protected by contracts the benefiting spouse signed without reading. Stephen's team demanded time to review. Alana granted it graciously. On screen, Stephen's mother shook her head slowly. After 20 minutes, Stephen's lawyers returned looking defeated. The contracts are valid, the lead attorney admitted. But surely we can negotiate a reasonable settlement rather than maximum claims that destroy the company entirely. I agree. Destruction serves no one. Alana slid copies of a final document across the table. That's why I'm offering Mr. Cross a choice. Option 1. Mr. Cross signs full ownership of Cross Development to a trust I control. In exchange, he receives a settlement allowing him to start over with dignity. Existing projects complete, employees keep jobs, clients receive proper service. He walks away with capital to build something new if he learns from this. That's our entire company, Stephen protested. The company I built while you took credit. Alana's voice remained steady. Option 2, we litigate. I pursue maximum legal claims for unpaid consulting work, intellectual property, relationship ownership. Litigation destroys what value remains, costs everyone money, and ensures you end up with significantly less. But you get to fight if that matters. Stephen's lawyers were already shaking their heads. There's a third component to option 1, Alana continued. The settlement includes a separate trust for your child with Ashley. I don't punish children for their father's choices. That trust ensures your son or daughter has financial security regardless of what happens with you. Ashley's parents on screen looked surprised and grateful. Why would you do that? Stephen asked. Because I'm better than you. Alana's words were simple and devastating. I don't destroy innocent parties just because I can. That's the difference between us, Stephen. You burn what you can't control. I build, even when it doesn't serve me. Mr. Tan from the investment consortium spoke up. Ms. King has been clear about her intentions. If Mr. Cross accepts option 1, we continue our investment relationships under improved management. If litigation seems likely, we withdraw entirely. The message was clear. Alana had already secured their loyalty. Stephen looked at the papers, then at his family on screen, then at Alana's impassive face. You planned this from the beginning, he accused. From the moment you found out about Ashley. No, from that moment I planned to survive. Taking everything was just the most efficient path to survival. Alana leaned forward. You broke my heart, humiliated me publicly, replaced me while I was injured and alone. You did it all while benefiting from the empire I built. So yes, I planned carefully. I leveraged relationships I'd built. I documented everything because I learned from you that trust without protection is just another word for foolishness. You're destroying me. I'm giving you options that let you survive with dignity. That's more mercy than you showed me. Alana straightened. Sign the papers or don't, but decide now. My patience is exhausted. Stephen's lawyers huddled with him, their whispers urgent and defeated. We need time to review. No, Alana cut him off. You've had a week. The contracts are straightforward. Mr. Cross either accepts accountability for what he took from me, or we proceed to litigation that benefits no one. Decide now. Silence filled the room, except for ambient noise from the video conference. Stephen looked at his mother on screen. She nodded once. Sign. He looked at Alana, trying to find any trace of the woman who'd loved him. She looked back with eyes holding nothing except professional resolve. I was wrong, Stephen said quietly, picking up the pen. When I told you that you were cold and mechanical, that you cared more about work than our relationship, I was wrong. You were never cold. You were surviving a marriage where your competence was resented instead of valued. He began signing. I destroyed the best thing in my life because it made me feel small. That's not your failure, it's mine. Your self-awareness comes too late to matter, Alana said. Sign the papers, Stephen. He signed each page, surrendering pieces of identity he'd never actually possessed, just borrowed from her expertise and called his own. When finished, Alana collected the documents with efficient finality. The trust transfer completes within 48 hours. Your settlement arrives within the week. The separate trust for your child will be established simultaneously. She stood, gathering her materials. Employees will be informed of management transition with assurances their positions are secure. Clients will receive personalized communications about continuity. What happens to the company name? Stephen asked. It stays cross-development. I'm not interested in erasing your family legacy, just claiming what I built. Alana moved toward the door, pausing for her final words. You asked me once what I wanted. I wanted partnership, Stephen. I wanted to build something together where both of us mattered. You wanted a cheerleader who made you feel important. You got what you wanted. So did I, eventually. We're both better off. Are we? Alana looked at him directly. I'm building an empire under my own name. You're starting over with enough capital to succeed if you learn humility. Yes, we're both better off. She turned to the video screen. Thank you for bearing witness. Sometimes consequences need an audience. Alana King walked out, her posture straight, her cane barely noticeable now, her victory complete but carrying none of the triumph Stephen had feared. The investors followed with perfunctory goodbyes that felt like eulogies. Stephen sat in the empty conference room, surrounded by failed lawyers and papers, documenting the systematic transfer of everything he'd thought was his. On the video screen, his mother spoke before disconnecting. You had a queen, Stephen, and you treated her like a servant. Don't expect sympathy from me. The screen went dark. Outside the building, Alana paused on the sidewalk as her phone buzzed with incoming messages. 3 new investment opportunities, 2 partnership requests. A confirmation from her lawyer that all transfers were complete and legally ironclad. She looked up at the Manhattan skyline, the city where she'd once been invisible, operating in someone else's shadow, building someone else's dream. Now she stood in her own light. A text from her assistant appeared. Your 3 p.m. with the Singapore developers is confirmed. They're calling the project the King Tower. Alana smiled, not with bitterness or satisfaction, but with the quiet certainty of someone who'd learned the most important lesson. Power isn't taken. It isn't given. It's built in silence. Brick, by careful brick, until the day you're ready to sign your name on the empire you created. She typed back, perfect, let's build something extraordinary, and walked forward into the city that was finally hers.